for the quarterbacks, there's actually a number of guys, like this is not a great waiver wire week, but quarterback is actually pretty good. So I'm going to start with Jimmy G. He's 39% rostered. Had his best game of the year last week and then had another great game, or great for him. Completed 29 of 41 attempts for 296 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. I mean, it didn't translate to a win here, but we're talking about fantasy. Like it doesn't always translate 1-to-1. So I did talk about him as a 1 or 2 week streaming option, obviously last week with the Falcons, and he's got Kansas City this week, who has been allowing the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year. So I think he's a pretty high floor option. Like he's pretty safe. I don't think he's going to give you 30 points, but I feel like his floor is like 15 points, which is pretty good for a guy that you kind of just need to plug and play. Matt Ryan actually looked pretty good. The Colts offense finally showing signs of life in the 34-27 win over the Jags. The run game looked solid, which is weird because Jonathan Taylor wasn't there. The offensive line actually held its own, and Ryan was near perfect. 58 passing attempts in that game for 385 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, currently the QB2. So he's got the Titans on deck, have allowed the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year. So those would probably be my top 2 targets. Other guys that I would be looking at, Daniel Jones, Marcus Mariota, like those, in Justin Fields, those would be 3 guys that just give you a nice floor with the rushing. Like Justin Fields has been averaging over 50 rushing yards per game in like the last couple of games. So it's not always the prettiest, but it seems to get the job done for fantasy.
What about you, Mike? Any quarterbacks that are on your radar that maybe, not more heavily rostered in fantasy these days?
First of all, since Samantha went next level with Jameson Williams, I'll go next level. How about, and this is a pretty bad waiver wire week. So how about if you have that first waiver wire priority, look for kicker Daniel Carlson. Everybody might have dropped him last week. You can at least say, well, I have the best kicker for the rest of the year. I'm sure if you have the first waiver priority, that won't solve anything, but there's one to go look for. But now, look, the quarterbacks, I think, they punished us for trying to chase the hot hand this week because the biggest pickups in previous weeks were Carson Wentz and Geno Smith, and they didn't get the job done this week. This week it was Mariota and it was Bailey Zappi and it was Matt Ryan out of nowhere. So the last thing I want to do is try to chase the guy who I think I can count on for the rest of the year. Dak Prescott's only 78% rostered, so that would be very exciting. Not in any of my leagues, but I think Mariota. The one good thing about Mariota is he found Kyle Pitts finally, realized he's allowed to throw to him in the end zone. But with Atlanta winning, he might actually hold on to that job. I think one of the fears with him was that maybe Desmond Ridder is lurking around the corner, maybe has a little bit more job security. That's one of the few things that makes somebody on this list stand out.
No, absolutely. And going back to some of Samantha's ideas, I got to tell you, I personally would much rather Jimmy G than Matt Ryan. We've made this point before that Jimmy G did not have a training camp, is only starting to build. And like Samantha's saying, kind of the arrow continues to be pointing up. The matchup this week against Kansas City, you could expect a negative game script, one where it is again on the arm of Jimmy Garoppolo, whereas Matt Ryan is going to be welcoming back Jonathan Taylor into the fold. So I could understand if the Colts actually go a little bit more run heavy down the road, but we will find out. For me, it's Jimmy G throwing, trying to keep up with Patty Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs.